And oh, I just got the message that this meeting is being
Yes.
recorded. So good. So once again, thank you very much for joining us on a Wednesday evening. Actually, not everywhere in the world probably it's a Wednesday evening, and I do believe that most of us are still recuperating after Easter and after the food that we were being served at Easter. So I'll try to share the screen right now with my slides, with my presentation. I will not be, when I present the slides, I will not be able to see the chat. So if you're writing anything to me, I will not be able to respond. Apologies for that. It doesn't mean I'm ignoring you. It means that I have no access to it. And also as a man, I can focus only on one thing at a time. And that's going to be clicking more than anything. So I have this slide on my computer that this meeting is being recorded. So I think I should press continue and start the presentation proper. Can you see this first slide, the title slide? All right, no problem. Okay, nobody says no, so I believe you do. The title of my presentation is "What Goes Around Comes Around," a new, with a question mark, as was specified, hybrid reality in the tertiary foreign language classroom. A hybrid reality because we, hopefully, the pandemic teaching is over. And now everything is going back to normal. But the pandemic had a massive effect on the way teaching was perceived during this period, and will be perceived afterwards. That's why I call it a hybrid reality, because I believe that we will be using a little bit of the methodology that we typically used in the classroom, tertiary or not, but also we will be using lots of techniques and lots of methods that we were forced to use, or that we had to use during the pandemic. So I'm going to test or make the hypothesis that it wasn't actually that bad. I mean, it was bad, obviously, but there was something in it that we could take to our new classroom and use it to the benefit of our students and also for ourselves. I said, I hope there would be no problems, but I cannot change slides. All right. I cannot
put it in non-presentation mode. Yes, that's what I experienced myself. And
okay.
then
I've got the second one now.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's moving.
It goes.
So the agenda for this webinar is going to be not that long. So I'm expecting to be talking for approximately 45-50 minutes, as was suggested to me. So the agenda for the webinar is as follows. The webinar is going to be in 3 parts, where in the first part, I'm going to share with you some reflections of mine of what online teaching has taught me over the last 2.5 years. I'm just curious whether your impressions are the same or whether you have similar reflections to mine. So that's going to be the first part of the webinar. Then in the second part, I'm going to try and address what I call shifting paradigms in teaching. So how the teaching of foreign languages, especially English, especially in the tertiary education, will be affected, or is affected, or has been affected, in fact, by the teaching in the times of pandemic. And finally, I'm going to focus on some practical implications for classroom use. But I'm going to interweave the webinar, interweave the presentation with a little bit of practicum, because I believe we're all practitioners and we're not here to listen to theoretical ruminations. And again, Jesus, it doesn't change. Okay, I know what I've got to press, I hope. So what I've learned during the pandemic is what I call the three truths that I live by, or that we live by. Of course, your mileage may vary, your experience could be different in that respect. But to me, what I've learned was that I should expect absolutely no support from the agendas whose existence is defined and should be conditioned by providing teacher support. In that, if you remember, as you remember, especially in the Polish context, during the pandemic, we just got absolutely no help, absolutely no support from those agendas, mainly the Ministry of Education. Lots of bills, lots of regulations, but no proper training. We were just taught to start teaching online, whatever it meant. I remember at my university, at the beginning, it wasn't really specified as to how to go about it, whether we should use any particular platform, whether we should use something that we call asynchronous teaching, which means that we're leaving the stuff for the students and they study whatever we have left for them, and that's it. Basically, no support. So that's the first thing that I have learned. What stemmed from that was that I had to, and probably we all had to, rely on the method that we call the trial and error method. And we know that the trial and error method is or consists of two things: that you try things out and see if they work, and sometimes they don't. So using this trial and error method, we mustn't be put off if anything goes wrong, if things don't go as planned. You live and learn, people say. Then the third truth was that actually the support came, but the support came from the other teachers. The support came in different fora. The support came in Twitter, the support came on Facebook, where we were able to discuss things, to consult things, to share things, to adapt things, or even to steal things from each other. Obviously, steal in inverted commas, because it was all with the permission of the authors of those who were able to come up with some solutions to the problems that we had. Talking about those rather negative experiences, which were verbalized in those past reflections and future practices, obviously the outcome is positive, because what I have learned in my teaching, in my experience, is, for example, that my voice is not as nice as I think it is. So whenever in the online setting, whenever I do the talking, my students rarely listen. And I thought that whenever I teach them things, they would be listening. They would like it, they would appreciate it. But then it probably would be your experience as well. Then we would come to different meetings as teachers, and then I understood my students' feelings. You can't concentrate. There are too many distractors. There are too many things which are much better than just sitting and listening to the person, for example, going out for a cigarette or having a coffee, or just anything, really. So the bottom line to that is that after some trial and error with me trying to tell the students important things, I realized that perhaps they should be able to discover those things by themselves. And instead of me doing the talking, they should be doing work. Then the second outcome, the second positive outcome, was something that we call the flipped classroom, or the flipped model, or the flipped classroom method. And I started resorting to that method, and I realized that actually I flip quite a lot with my students in the online context, in the online setting, in that I knew that I have to somehow channel the students, I have to give them some sort of incentive, I have to give them ideas to discuss, to talk about, and then the classes go much more smoothly, and the students are in a way channeled and ready to discuss things that we would otherwise be discussing in the regular classroom with the regular interaction. As you know, in the online setting, in the using Teams or using Zoom or using any other platform that you are using, the major problem is the lack of proper interaction with the learners. When I was teaching in this traditional form, when I was teaching in the real classroom, I would say 70 or even 80% of what was happening was the interaction between the teacher and the students, and also the interaction or the interactions between the students. That was not possible in the online context. So I realized, or I learned, that the flipped classroom method is actually a solution, or at least a partial solution to the problem. And obviously, with the flipped classroom model, there's nothing wrong using that in this traditional setting, in this real classroom setting. Now that we have gone back to universities, to schools, to the classrooms, there's nothing wrong with using the flipped method, and I'm going to prove it as we move along. I've also learned that I have to reconsider lesson planning, that a lesson plan is important, but what is much more important is the actual structure of the lesson. Now, what's the difference between the lesson plan and the lesson structure? The lesson plan is basically the things that you do, the things that you are planning to do with the students, the kind of agenda of the lesson, whereas the structure is a bit less specific than the lesson plan, in that the structure is basically thinking about when your students' interest or attention might flag or even disappear, and then you've got to give them something to bring them back to normal. So instead of planning my lessons, I started thinking of structuring my lessons, and I started thinking of structuring my lessons in a way I would structure those with children. So every 10 minutes or every 12 minutes, I would give them something to keep them going in a way. So hence the bullet point goes, I structure my lesson as if I was dealing with small children who get bored quickly and easily, because people in front of the screen do. Then the next positive outcome was that I, and not just me obviously, started supplementing my courses with whatever media I had at my disposal. And I love YouTube, so I was using YouTube quite a lot, but also I was using other platforms like MS Teams, Moodle, for example, testing the students, etc. And I used that for various reasons. So I did that for giving the students ideas to talk about, for giving them some ideas for writing, for giving them grammar, etc. And again, I'm going to illustrate that as we move on with the material. Then I also learned, which stemmed from the structure of the lesson, I learned, or I tried to maximize classroom time. That means that I was trying to avoid doing the things that the students could do on their own, that the students could do it at home, that they will not need their togetherness for. So maximizing classroom time was mainly interaction, however limited it was. It was giving them a chance to speak. It was giving them feedback. So basically the things that they wouldn't be able to do on their own in the privacy of their rooms outside the contact hours. The next one concerned error correction. So we all know everything about error correction. We know what works, we know what doesn't work. We know that we should correct students gently in some situations. We know that we should be more immediate in some other situations. But the truth I've learned was that there's no point in correcting the students on the spot. So I just stopped doing that altogether. I have decided to have delayed feedback. You know what it was like in the online setting. That is, the students would say something, and then you would stop them, you would correct them, and they wouldn't notice, or they would notice, and the flow would go, and it just wouldn't work. It was counterproductive. So I stopped doing that, and I'm not doing that now in this regular traditional classroom setting. Now I need a sip of water, if you excuse me. Then the next thing is feedback and self-assessment. In my courses that I was teaching over the last 2 years or so, I devoted 2 regular classes for feedback. One obviously at the end of the semester, of the term, and one in the middle. And it was one-to-one, so it wasn't giving students feedback in front of everybody else, but it was one-to-one. And obviously I was telling them what I liked, I was telling them what I didn't quite like. Then the students would provide self-assessment, so they were assessing their own performance. And also this mid-semester self-assessment session, which was usually after 7 weeks of teaching and learning. I asked each student to think of 3 aspects that they would like to improve at the end of the course. And some of them were highly specific, like, saying that I would like to get rid of my R when before the consonant, for example. Some others would say that they just want to be more fluent. Some others would say they'd like to make fewer mistakes, and so on and so forth. But I asked each of them to come up with 3 such aspects that they think they would like to improve, and that they think would be improvable or doable or achievable, the goals that will be achievable for the learners. And I actually learned that when it came to assessing the learners, to giving them the final grade for the course, that my assessment was much more lenient than theirs, that they were very critical about themselves, and that many of them didn't actually believe in the possibility of achieving any success in learning English. Perhaps it was my fault, I don't know, but it struck me that the students were so strict about themselves, whereas my impression was much more lenient. And finally, I have the impression that when I was teaching in the pandemic times, I was more of a manager than a typical pedagogue. So I was managing the learning process, I was creating space for learning, I was organizing space for learning, and I was kind of standing aside. I wasn't definitely in the center of the whole thing. I tried to put the students there. And again, I don't think this is something that could not be used or could not be achieved in regular or traditional classroom teaching. So if we try to put it all together, probably the most important thing, the most important aspects is realizing that what we are here for is to make affordances for effective learning. I keep saying during my talks that learning is much more important than teaching, and that our job is to actually make affordances for the learners so they can learn more effectively. Then the big debate concerning teacher talking time versus student talking time. There are different views on that, but since we decide to be less central figures in the classroom, then minimizing our talking time seems like a viable option, seems like a way to go, simply. And obviously no lecturing. So no talking for too long to the learners during talks, something I'm doing now actually at the moment. Then the third thing is the importance of the channeling of the learners, both when it comes to the topic that will be discussed in the classroom, so that's the flipped classroom bit, but also the language that will be discussed in the classroom. And again, I'm going to illustrate each of those in a few moments. Then structuring the lesson rather than planning the lesson, something else I was explaining earlier. Then using various, what we call modern technology examples, nothing modern really in them, but using YouTube, using Twitter, using Facebook, using Moodle, using Teams, using whatever you have at your disposal to supplement your course book. Then doing in class what cannot be practiced at home. I do believe that the students do not really have to do all the things which are in the course book in the classroom, that some of the material can be delegated as homework, and instead we could use the classroom time, the lesson time, for something well, more useful. Then it's all about redefining error correction strategies, and also, lastly, but as importantly, talking to the students about their performance and allowing them to set achievable goals. So that's about feedback, and that's about self-assessment. So now I'd like to move on to the second part of this webinar, and I would like to pay attention to the notion of flipped classroom, or the flipped classroom methodology. The very basic definition of the flipped classroom is that in this model, the traditional roles of homework and classroom work are reversed. So basically, what we do, or what we ask the students to do at home, is usually to put something together that you have covered during the lesson. In the flipped classroom model, you give them homework to prepare them for something to come, for something that will happen in the lesson. So not really practicing what was taught to the students, but giving them some sort of ideas, both from the perspective of language and topic or content, of what will happen in the next class. It's a very basic definition. I've done some talks on the flipped classroom before, where the definition was extended. It was all analyzed, but I don't think that we have time and energy to talk about flipped classroom in detail right here. Instead, I'm going to show you an example of a class, a flipped class or a flipped lesson. I actually designed the whole course at our university, the whole course, which was based on the principles of the flipped classroom methodology. And it was basically a discussion class for the students. And I've chosen one lesson, one class to show you what I mean, to show you how it was all conducted. And as you could see in the slide, it was a lesson about humor. Always popular, isn't it? So why not talk about humor right now? So normally in the flipped classroom approach, there are two important parts. One is something that the students do before the class, and then the second one is what is happening during the lesson, or during the class. And in this particular lesson, what the students had to do before the class was to read something and to watch something. I'll show you what in a second, and what they had to do during the class was to discuss something which had been prepared in advance, and then do some language practice or language bits which are based on the text that the students had to read at home. The typical criticism that we hear about the flipped classroom method is what if somebody has not done the homework, or what if somebody has not read the text that was assigned, or what if somebody has not watched the clip or the movie or whatever that will constitute the basis for whatever happens or will happen during the lesson. And obviously, there will be such students. I myself did not have this problem teaching the flipped classroom course for a year. Of course, it happened, but it wasn't a problem. It's like somebody doesn't do the homework, the usual homework after class. I mean, it happens and there's nothing you could do about it. But I didn't have like masses of students not having done their homework, and then the class would collapse. As you will see, lots of what the students do in class is based on group work, not really pair work, but group work. So the assumption is that if there is someone who hasn't read something or hasn't watched something that was assigned for this class, there will be others. So not everything is going to be lost. The text that they were asked to read was this: is there such a thing as a national sense of humor? I'm just showing you a fragment of this text. It was written by Gary McKeown, who is a lecturer of psychology at the University in Belfast. And it's about stereotyping. It's about proving that there are things which are common when it comes to a sense of humor, but also there will be differences when it comes to it. And this is the text that the students had to read before the class. They were given the link, and that task was to read the text, and then there was the task that was related to it. The second thing they had to watch was the collection of short video clips, which would illustrate different kinds of humor, different types of humor. And again, after the students have watched them at home, then in class there was an activity that in a way put them together. So I've got a YouTube clip right here and right now, and I will risk playing it to you now. Just want to give you a flavor of what the students had to watch. It's an interview between Rowan Atkinson and Elton John. So let's see whether it works and how it works. And it usually, with Teams or with Zoom, the internet slows down quite dramatically. Oh, there we go. Can you see that all right? Well, it hasn't started yet, but it will, I hope. Okay, I could see some thumbs up. There are ads that we can get rid of. It's very slow. I'm sorry for that.
Which has encompassed such performing giants as Sir Ian McKellen, Dame Judi Dench, and of course, Christopher Biggins. But tonight we have to welcome his chosen field. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Elton John. Elton, do you mind if I call you Elton? No, it's fine. Good. Well, Elton. I'm sure the first question that everybody would like to ask you is this. Funny name, Elton. How did you come by it?
Well, I used to be in a band, and I wanted to become a singer in my own right, and I wanted to choose a name, and the saxophone player in the band was called Elton, so I chose that name.
Did you ever consider John Elton?
No.
You didn't? Okay. Right, well, let's start with those early albums then, one of which I believe was called simply Elton John.
Yes, that's correct.
And you didn't feel awkward with the name at all? No. You didn't feel that people might say, wait a minute, they mean John Elton. they've cocked up the record sleeve and printed the bloody name the wrong way around.
No, I thought it sounded great. And, you know, I thought people would be more interested in the music rather than the name.
Oh. Now, to the songs themselves, many of the lyrics were, of course, written by Bernie Taupin.
Yes, that's right.
Well, I'd like to talk about Bernie for a while, since obviously he's been an enormous influence on your career.
Yes, he has, yes.
Tell me, did you ever discuss changing his name? Because presumably Taupin Bernie would have been more consistent with your Elton John.
Look, do you want to talk about the old songs or not?
All right, the songs. The old songs. Your song is a classic, isn't it?
Yes, quite popular, yes.
Well, there is a verse in that song in which, talking about the eyes of the person that the song is about, you sing, "Excuse me for asking, these things I do. You see, I've forgotten if they're green or they're blue."
Yes.
What I'd like to know is this. Is it this sort of chronic forgetfulness that led you to forget that Elton is not, in fact, a Christian name at all? It is a surname. And not a very attractive one at that.
Let's talk about something else, sorry. Forget the name.
All right, Mr. John. Let's talk about being a stage performer, should we? Tell me, do you ever watch other performers and get jealous?
I'm not sure I follow you there. I mean, jealous of what?
Well, for instance, Ben Elton.
I don't have to do this, you know.
All right. Look, I'm sorry.
Go.
All right. Fair enough, moving on then. Many consider your masterpiece, of course, to be the album Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And there is one song that people are particularly moved by called Candle in the Wind.
Yes, a lot of people seem to like that song.
Now, this song is in fact dedicated to Norma Jean Baker, who of course changed her name to Monroe Marilyn.
Marilyn Monroe.
My point exactly. Marilyn is a Christian name, so it comes first. Can't you see that? You word blind.
I've had enough of this.
All right.
Okay, I believe you got the flavor of what it was like. I'm trying to switch off YouTube, but not really switching off the presentation, and back to it. Okay, so that was just one of the videos that the students were supposed to watch for this class. There were others. There were 6 altogether. So there was a video with James Bond and the Queen. That was from 2012. It was the Olympics, the Olympic Games in London, and James Bond took the Queen to the stadium. It was pretty funny because they used parachutes to land on the stadium. Then the next one, it was Ricky Gervais and Liam Neeson in Life's Too Short, talking about Liam Neeson being a comedian. Then there was another one with a highly offensive Jeremy Clarkson in Top Gear, offending virtually any nation in Europe, and not just in Europe. Then the next one was a baby laughing at the howling of the dog. So it was just a laughter for, say, 3 minutes. And the last one was Monty Python's Hungarian phrasebook sketch. The load for the students was quite big, as you could see, because they had to read something and they had to watch something. And the clips were pretty short, but altogether, I would say it took like an hour to watch them all, plus the text that I was showing you earlier. And then when they came, when the lesson began, they had to discuss things in groups. just to give you some example questions, like, do you agree with the concept of a national sense of humor presented in the article? Can you think of any aspects of English humor which are not funny to you? And by you, I mean the Polish students I had, but also the Bulgarian students, the Albanian students, the Spanish students, and the Turkish students who are attending my course, or which video appeals to you the most and which is not funny at all. So the students were discussing these and other questions as well, and then we took feedback, so they had to present to the rest of the students and the rest of the group the outcome of that discussion. And then there was language work, and in this language work part, we came back to the text that the students had read at home, and we focused on just one aspect, one linguistic aspect, which was the adverb and adjective combinations, like hilariously funny, appallingly stupid, utterly uninspiring, or totally out of place, to name but a few. And then the 90-minute lesson was over, most of which was devoted to discussion, most of which was devoted to speaking. And as I was saying earlier, not really problems, that there were no problems with students coming in and saying, we're not prepared, we haven't watched this, we haven't read that. It virtually never happened in any of those. Although I realized there were individual students who may not have done what was expected of them. So this is probably the extreme example of the flipped classroom, but normally I believe that you're using a course book with your students, and that the course book would constitute your backbone. So you'd use most of the stuff from the course book to teach English to your students during your classes, but I believe, and I'm going to show you, that a lot of elements that you can find in a course book do lend themselves to the flipped classroom methodology, or the techniques which are associated with the flipped classroom method. I'm going to use some examples from the course book from National Geographic Learning, the course book called Voices. The level, as you can see, is upper intermediate. And I'm going to show you how we can implement the ideas which I was describing and talking about earlier so far in this talk. How can we implement them in a regular classroom where the course book would constitute the core of what's happening, and as I said, it's the backbone both for the students and the lecturer and the teacher. So I'd like to start off by showing you the whole lesson, and it's one of the very first lessons from the course book, Universal Emotions. And I would like to draw attention to two aspects. As you could see, the lesson is mostly skills-based, although there is some grammar in it, but it's mostly listening and speaking in this lesson. And there's a nice graphic showing you emoticons around the world. So emojis are here to stay, but good old emoticons still have that place in emails and texts. Two different styles of emoticons around the world tell us anything about the culture they come from. And there are some examples there. Then the lesson continues. And obviously, I thought that this very graphic, this very box itself, lends itself quite nicely to using the flipped classroom flipped classroom method with the students. So before the class, you might ask them to find some unusual, some funny, some outdated, some most popular, some difficult to understand, whatever criteria you want to choose with the students. Emoticons, then you can ask them to store them on their mobile phones. And then when the class starts, they just discuss those in groups. They could vote for the best if you want to do it like that, and then to present them to the rest of the class. And in that way, the students would be channeled and hopefully more willing to deal with the theme of the lesson, which is this part of communication, which involves different graphics, different emoticons. Then at the end of this lesson, we've got the speaking task where the students are supposed to work in pairs, design a questionnaire to ask your classmates about emotions, emojis and emoticons, and follow the instructions. They have to write 6 questions, at least 6 questions, and to use the grammar box to assist them in their writing. And while looking at it, I immediately detect a problem. And the problem is that designing a questionnaire with 6 questions would consume a lot of time, a lot of valuable classroom time. And as I was saying earlier, we want to maximize the classroom time. We want to devote it to the things that the students would not be able to do at home. Therefore, again, parts of the speaking task could be done with the flipped classroom methodology, where the students would prepare or would design a questionnaire, or at least parts of the questionnaire that they could then consult with the grammar box at home before the class begins. And the same happens with grammar. Again, this is actually something which I have learned. It was a serious lesson actually, that grammar explanations, when I explain things, I usually re-explain something that the students can find in the course book. It's not that effective. And I have found a number of nice channels on YouTube that do grammar quite nicely, that actually can supplement the course book quite nicely, like, for example, Voices. The 3 examples I've got here for you is English animated, which are very, very short explanations, clips with animated figures to explain the different aspects of the English grammar. The British Council website, YouTube channel, or the BBC English 6-minute grammar channel also do the job quite nicely. I think much better than I do, because, as I said before, what I typically do while explaining grammar is that I re-explain what the students can find in the course book. If you give them access to, or if you give them links to any of those, then they can watch it over and over again, to watch it with subtitles. You could even give them links for the channels which are in the students' first language to explain the rules of the English grammar. So, as you could see, in one lesson, there might be 3 parts or 3 aspects that could use the flipped classroom methodology. When I was going through Voices, I realized that my favorite part would be the D lessons, because they are mostly communication-based lessons, and probably the most interesting one from the perspective of content was 4D, understanding turn-taking styles. If you just have a very brief peek at the types of activities in that lesson, we've got speaking, listening, my voice, which is also speaking, and speaking. So lots and lots of speaking. And it's about the type of communicator you could possibly be. So the activity starts with a per-work activity where the students have to read the situations and discuss the questions, like you're at a cafe with a friend you haven't seen for many years. There are pauses in between questions and answers from you and your friend. Or you're talking to your friends, you ask questions to invite each other to speak. You speak fairly fast, but rarely interrupt each other, and so on and so forth. And then there's the matching activity. So it's like a pre-speaking activity. We could say, then we've got listening, that is linked with the graphic on the next page. In this listening, we identify 3 types of communicators. Something interesting for me, I immediately decided which type I am when I was looking at this lesson. But as you could see, listening is also put together with speaking. So what do you know about the sports in the graphic, how are the 3 taking styles similar to bowling, basketball, and rugby. And this is the graphic. So what kind of communicator are you? Are you a bowling, basketball, or rugby communicator? And then there are short explanations of what one is. Then we've got the my voice part, so watch the video and think about the questions. Probably this part could be flipped, so the video could be set as homework for the students, so they can watch it before the class, so they are ready for the class. Then we've got the communication skills box, and the lesson concludes with a speaking activity, which is called Own It, where the students are supposed to work in groups of 3. And on page 155, the instructions are given. And obviously, it's a role play activity where the students in those groups of 3 are assigned roles by the teacher. One is the rugby, one is the bowling, and one is the third type of communicator. So this gels quite nicely with maximizing your time, or do with your students in class what they cannot do or wouldn't be able to do at home, and delegate other things as homework if you can. The next aspect I would like to raise and discuss is interacting with the text. And this is a problem. This is definitely a problem in Poland, but I believe it's not just a problem in Poland, it's a growing problem all over the world. Many reasons why it is a problem, or why it has become a problem. And probably it stems from the fact that there's so much text around us these days that we are not really, or we do not really find time to properly interact with it. We've forgotten how to do it, or our students have forgotten how to do it. We typically give them comprehension questions, and comprehension questions for me are not really tools to check comprehension or to develop reading as a skill. Comprehension questions for me are a set of strategies, and if you learn the strategy, you know how to deal with comprehension questions, not necessarily having to go deeply into the text or read the text in the first place. So a deeper interaction with the text is needed, obviously, and this should happen at 2 levels. The level of comprehension or understanding, and also the level of language. And I would like to show you a text, show an example of what could be done with the students. Obviously, we're not going to read the text, but the text has got a lot of words of different animals, different insects, different birds. And I've chosen this text, excuse me. I've chosen this text because I think what will happen, or what might happen with the students, is that the students will write down a lot of new words that will be completely useless. For example, they will note down things like fork-tailed drongo. They might write down things like mockingbird, all the names of the animals that will be new to them, but not particularly useful from the perspective of everyday language use. So I thought that it's important to provide a set of strategies for them, or to show them which lexical aspects are actually important and relevant for language use. And with this, I would divide the students into groups. We've got 7 paragraphs in this text. As you can see, there are gaps as well, but we can ignore gaps for now. We could just focus on what it is, what we have on the page. So students in groups, each group will focus on just 1 paragraph. Like, for example, I'm going to show you the paragraph in a moment. And the task is to choose up to 3 expressions or phrases that could be useful in their opinion. And if we look at the final paragraph, the last paragraph, finally, no article about communication in the animal kingdom would be complete without mentioning African wild dogs. These sociable creatures make decisions by sneezing. Yes, according to scientists, they get together in groups and sneeze to decide whether to go on a hunt or not. If more than half sneezes, it's a yes. So it turns out even democracy wasn't invented by us. The students would be asked to find such expressions that would be useful to them, in that they might be difficult to be put together if you don't know them as a whole phrase. For example, know something would be complete without, which is a nice phrase. I call them nice phrase, actually. In literature, they call lexical bundles, but I call them nice phrases. So know something would be complete without would be an example of such a phrase. And if you look at this paragraph, there will be quite a few of such nice expressions, apart from those names of the animals that the students might be willing to write down, and would be tempted to actually write them down because they are new. Definitely, I would like my students to underline make decisions by something. I would like them to note down according to. I would like them to note down decide whether to or not. I would like them to go on a hunt. I would like them to note down it's a yes. I would like them to note down it turns out. And obviously the first paragraph would have to be together with the teacher as an example. So out of 7 paragraphs, the first one will be done together, and then 6 groups and students working individually, just focusing on one paragraph. And I was doing that. I started doing that before the pandemic, and I realized that actually the students, it's not really lexical work. It's not really a lexical activity for the learners, but it's more like an awareness raising activity. An awareness raising activity, meaning that the students begin to notice that such things exist together, and they start noticing them. And we know that when we talk about acquisition of certain aspects of language, the first stage would be the ability to notice that something exists or something occurs in the language. And this is what the activity primarily does. It draws their attention to something they might find difficult, might actually fail to notice on their own. So here you're kind of helping them, you're directing them, or you're giving them the fishing rod rather than the fish itself. And each text, that's another important thing when we talk about developing reading. Each text goes together with a critical thinking skill box. So it's not just comprehension questions that we give them, a comprehension task that we give them, but we give them the critical thinking tasks, or tasks which are based on the critical thinking skill, which I consider rather central. Just a few lines about writing. There's lots and lots of writing in Voices. In every unit, there's one lesson which is devoted exclusively for writing. And writing is kind of geared towards English for academic purposes, kind of, because obviously it depends on the complexity of the text or complexity of the task. But again, if you decide to do writing with the students, because you may or you may not do it, if you decide to skip those units in writing in Voices, nothing will happen. But if you decide to use them, then the students will have some additional extra writing with you. If you decide to do writing with the learners, then obviously the site to go to would be grammarly.com. I've been following this website for 3 years now, and I have to say that it's been developing gradually, steadily, and for the better. Anytime I open it, there's something new added, and it's a very, very good one when it comes to student writing for themselves, not for the teachers, but for the learners. It suggests things, it corrects things, it focuses on vocabulary, it focuses on grammar, it focuses on spelling, and it was, you could see the Ukrainian flag here. I've been told by one of my Ukrainian students that it was actually created by 2 Ukrainian friends who now live in San Francisco in the States, but they are Ukrainian. So, no conclusions. I believe conclusions are highly overrated, so I'm not going to bore you with conclusions to finish the talk, but I have found an activity in Voices which I really liked, and it's the activity which is similar to the one that I did during my humor lesson, and it's the adverb plus adjective combinations. So if you look at examples, it's about feelings, it's about emotions, this lesson and this activity. I saw a massive spider the other day. I was completely petrified, or I'm a bit concerned, or feel slightly impatient in 3, or really thrilled, and so on and so forth. So I'm glad that I found something which I had to come up with myself in a course book. If you would like to hear more about it, more about Voices, Adrian Chrostowski, who is with us today, is the person to contact, to ask. He knows everything about the book, much more than I do. I just looked at it and just cherry-picked the things which I liked. And for now, thank you very much for joining us, for being with us. And I think we have 2 minutes for questions. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ja też czekam, chcę umyć zęby. I nie wycieraj ręce, tylko w kąsie.
Okay, probably not the question to me.
Poprzedni tydzień, tak? Będzie wtorek, środa, tak?
Okay. Does anyone have any question? You can write it in the chat box. I'm checking the chat box right now, but I don't see anything apart from thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful.
Oh, there's the question. Is the flipped learning strategy, but I don't have the whole thing. You have to press the chat.
Daję, że chodzi.
Is the flipped learning strategy better? I think we've got some kind of somebody getting in the way. Is the flipped learning strategy better than the traditional one? I don't think it's the question of better or worse. I think it does what it should do when it comes to, as I said before, channeling the learners. So I would say if you can use it at times, if you can use it with certain activities, that why not go for it? I would immediately think of grammar explanations on YouTube. I would immediately think of finding something which is thematically related with the topic of the lesson, that the students would watch, read about, listen to, whatever, before the class. It will help. Whether it's better or not, I don't think it is really the question of being better or not being better. Another one, any tips for structuring our lessons effectively? I would say it depends. It depends on your learners. Now I was talking from the perspective of my learners. They could be different from yours, and yours could be different from somebody else's. So I usually the golden rule that I use during my lessons, but also in talks, is that the beginning has to be attractive, and then after about 10-15 minutes there has to be some attractive element. And by attractive, I mean not something directly or necessarily related to the topic of the lesson, but something like, I call a nice educational espresso. So, something that will get you going. Because you know that every 10-15 minutes, interest, not just students, but everybody's interest kind of goes down, it flags. It may disappear completely. So
chciała dzisiaj podobno pouczyć matematyki.
That's what I would do. Okay, I'm trying to read some others. Great tips and ideas. Thank you very much. That's from Tamari from Georgia, if I remember correctly. How often do I have to use it? And it's about the flipped classroom. It's not that you have to use it. It's just you could. or not? Can we use flipped method in face-to-face classroom in the same way as online? Yes, that was my point, actually. My point was that the flipped model makes it possible to use it. I mean, it's very flexible because you could use it both online, in the online context, but also in the, as we call it, traditional context, or the classroom context. I mean, if you ask them to do something before the class, you could do it both in the online environment and also in the I don't like the word traditional, but you know what I mean, in the traditional setting as well. Okay, I'm trying to read any other. Is it possible for a teacher to get a copy of a book? I think Adrian would say yes to that, obviously. He said yes to that. Okay, I believe I addressed all the questions that I can see here.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you once again for inviting me, IATEFL. Thank you, NGO, for sponsoring this talk, and thank you most of all, thank you all for being here, for joining us.
Thank you so much on behalf of IATEFL Poland. And we all, I think all of us, hope to see you at our annual conference in Poznań between the 16th and the 18th of September. Any news what it will be about?
I have no idea. I'm glad it's going to be in Poznań and not online.
Yeah, so are we, all of us.
That's the very good news.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you all. A big thank you to Piotr, and also to all participants. There were many participants, 40 plus. Yes, that was changing in the meantime, but 40 plus participants. So now I am going to stop recording. Okay.